This is the Conservative American Message, hosted by the one, the only, Cam Lau. Today is June 30th, 2025, and it is Social Media Day. Of course, being Social Media Day, before I bless you with my political insights, I'm going to have to ask you to pay for it. Not only by following me on Facebook and Instagram at the Conservative American Message, but also by rating this podcast with 5 stars wherever you happen to be listening today. President George Washington said, "The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is in extending our commercial relations to have with them as little political connection as possible." All my life, the nation of Iran has been called an enemy state of the United States. We've seen their people chanting death to America in the streets, and we've heard all about how these radical Muslims and the Ayatollahs hate the West. They hate Christianity. They want all of us infidels to be killed. They've supported terrorists and organizations all over the world just to do that very thing. Most concerningly of all is the nuclear weapons program that Iran has been supposedly working on for decades. And that is very concerning. Of all those things, I'm most concerned about the nuclear weapons. It can be really easy to look at a nation like Iran, run by corrupt, evil Muslims, and to just say they're all evil and we must destroy the country. That's how I honestly probably have felt up until about a year ago. I would have been in the camp of saying, let's just carpet bomb the whole country. Drop nukes on them if we have to. I mean, we got them, they don't. Let's nip this in the bud and get rid of them. But I think we have to think about this a little bit more graciously. I've come in the last year to this conclusion of not jumping into destroying all of our enemies just because America is the best and the United States can do whatever we want in the world. I have a new political frame that I look at, and it's a very simple thing. I just think, is that Christian? And I guess it's hard for me to justify carpet bombing an entire country of innocent civilians, Muslim or not, including children, and babies, nuking babies. I mean, that's what you're talking about if you're talking about blowing up Iran. They have children. They have families. It isn't all just these Ayatollahs and evil Muslim generals and soldiers. They're a whole country. So if we want to destroy them, we have to think about what that means. And I don't know if I can really get behind that mentality anymore from a Christian perspective. I think what's really important here, and what I'm going to delve into today, is why does Iran hate us? Is it just because we're infidels? Certainly that's part of it, and that part of it is inexcusable and not okay. I mean, you cannot just kill other people in other countries just because you don't agree with their religion. Don't support that at all. Definitely not a Muslim. However, there's a lot of other reasons that Iran might even be justified in their hatred of the West and of the United States and maybe even Israel. So Iran, we all know it's a nation in the Middle East, ran by the Ayatollahs. It's synonymous, actually, with the nation of Persia. So really one of the oldest civilizations in the world still existing today. They were a nation way back in biblical times. That's where all the stories of Queen Esther take place and lots of other stories in the Bible that happened in Persia. But fast forwarding from biblical times all the way to the earlier part of the 20th century, during World War II, there were a lot of rumors that the current ruler of Persia or Iran, the Shah Reza Shah Pahlavi, they believed that he was sympathetic to the Nazis, that he was wheeling and dealing with Adolf Hitler. And, that's a big no-no. Adolf Hitler, bad guy, definitely. I think we've had to address that before that on this show, that I think Adolf Hitler is bad. Don't get me wrong. But, the Shah might have been sympathetic. We don't really know. We just know that that's what the Allied forces believed. It doesn't help their case that Adolf Hitler did declare that all Persians were part of the perfect Aryan race. That's pretty incriminating there. I don't see why he would do that for a bunch of Middle Eastern people unless he was counting on their support and maybe even their oil. But, in an attempt to prevent them from joining the axis of evil, the British and Soviet forces in World War II did invade Iran, and they took control of the country. Not only did they take control, but they took the Shah and forced him to abdicate the throne to his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, and they exiled the former Shah to South Africa. So, it was somewhat of a success. They prevented Iran from joining Hitler, and extra bonus, they got to control the supply routes coming through there, and most important of all, they got control of the oil. And we all know that when there's war and there's the Middle East, there's usually something to do with oil. So they didn't have a whole hard time taking over Iran. They basically came in and declared that they were going to be controlling it and got rid of the Shah. And Iran didn't have any choice in it. I mean, they were never going to be able to stand up against the British and the Soviets together in World War II. There's no way. So at the end of World War II, when all the lands were being divvied up, the British decided that they were going to allow Iran to become a democracy while still retaining control of their oil fields. They established an Iranian-British company that was going to control all of the oil in the country. So, obviously some Iranians were not very happy with that. That's not a very populist move by the Iranian government to allow that, but it's a monarchy, so they probably don't care all that much. And the British and the Americans, we all claim to love democracy. But the problem is when the democratically elected leader, in so many places we've seen around the world, doesn't agree with what the United States wants or the British want or any of Israel, for that matter, any of these so-called chosen countries that rule the world, if they don't agree with us, then democracy be damned and we got to remove them. So that's exactly what happened in the 50s. The United States, along with the British, incited a coup and removed the democratically elected prime minister. So in 1951, Mohammad Mossadegh was elected as the prime minister of Iran. He was a democratic, progressive, nationalist guy. His main part of his agenda was taking control of the oil in the country. He was also very pro-democracy to the point of even being somewhat anti-monarchy, which did not rest well with the Shah. So Mossadegh was so bold to believe that Iran had oil under their feet, and that belonged to the Iranians, not to the British. And obviously we know that you cannot commit that sin in this world today, so that was not going to fly. So MI6 and the CIA got together, and they decided they were going to have to do something about this Mossadegh guy because he just wasn't playing along with what they wanted. He was working in the best interest of the people who elected him and not the people who have the biggest armies on the planet. So they started by spreading rumors about the prime minister trying to overthrow the government, overthrow the monarchy, and become the Shah himself. There was some great success in that, but eventually they had to get to the point of inciting violent protests across the country against the prime minister. The United States did eventually convince the Shah that Mossadegh had to go, so they removed him from office, and he was sent into exile. He was replaced by who the CIA chose, the Iranian General Zahedi. He was chosen to be the prime minister after Mossadegh was removed. So full-on coup done by the United States and the British in coordination. Mossadegh was not only removed from office unlawfully, he was actually tried for treason and almost sentenced to death, but instead he was lucky enough to just get a life sentence of house arrest. So, that's what happens if you go up against these big powers, the United States. You're going to end up probably close to your deathbed, if not a life sentence. So after this coup, and the new prime minister takes power, he coincidentally, just by happenstance, granted the British and the United States control of Iran's oil industry once again. So now the United States has even got their fingers in there. So, obviously that don't look good for us. And there's a lot of things that we know the CIA has done that are not good. But the CIA does not care about democracy because they are not beholden to the president, to Congress, to nobody. And so we can elect whoever we want, but as long as we have a shadow government organization that is doing whatever they please all over the world, we're never going to have democracy anywhere, including in this country. Now, there's also a huge religious aspect of all this, right? I mean, this is not just, the United States pissed them off, and so then they now hate us. I mean, Iran is a strong Muslim country, and you've probably heard of there's two different forms of Islam. You have the Sunni and the Shia. So the Sunnis, those are like pretty much most of the world outside of Iran and like a few other countries. They are far less strict. They believe that their faith guides their life, but it doesn't control what their government should be. Just a normal religion. They believe in making community decisions together that serve the interests of everyone. And I'm not a big proponent of Islam. I still think the Sunnis have their issues. There are some terrorists that are Sunnis. However, the Shias, who are the minority, they're the real crazy ones. They believe in not even having a government, basically, but just following the religious leaders directly, and that their religion should guide what the government does. They're the extremely strict form of Islam that, I think Muslims are scary either way. They can be dangerous, but the Shia Muslims are the big ones. They're the ones that are majority in Iran, although a minority in the world. I mean, like 90% of Iran is Shia Muslim. They're ruled by the religious leaders who are called the Ayatollahs, and so that's a little bit more to it than just the political stuff of what happened in the 40s and the 50s. There's also this huge religious aspect of it. And all of that comes into play to how Iran got to where it is today. Because even with the U.S. coup and putting a prime minister in place, they still had a fraudulent democracy controlled by the United States. So even though that's completely wrong and illegal, at least they wouldn't be hating the United States, right? And trying to create nuclear weapons to destroy us. I mean, if the United States is controlling them, should work out in our favor. Well, in the 1960s, the new Shah, Reza Pahlavi, his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, he wanted to compete with the West, get more modernized, not so much like this old Middle Eastern country that doesn't have technology, doesn't have rights. They really wanted to push forward and become more like these other European monarchies. But a lot of these social and cultural changes were met by fierce opposition by the Ayatollahs, the religious leaders in the country, because, giving women's rights, when the Ayatollahs were preaching that women should be covered and never speak, that's not going to mesh very well, especially when a majority of the country is following the religious leaders in or the religious practices of the Ayatollahs while trying to follow the government of the Shah. The Ayatollahs actually accused the Shah of having far too much United States and Israel influence, and the Grand Ayatollah, at the time, Ruhollah Khomeini, he was arrested multiple times for his opposition to the Shah, and in fact it got so bad that they eventually exiled him in 1964 for 15 years. He was out of the country in Iraq. And so that's why Iraq did in that time grow a larger Shia presence, because of Khomeini. But this was not received well by the Iranian people. There were massive protests for the better part of 2 decades. Just huge crowds just coming out, constantly in support of the Ayatollahs and getting larger and larger, to the point that in the 70s, the protests were turning into riots, and Khomeini's son actually ended up getting killed by the police. So in the late 70s there, a series of worker strikes, massacres, and even terrorist attacks in 1979 that were against the Shah. That really brought us to the point of where the Iranian Revolution was about to take off. So losing control of the military and fearing for his own life, his whole country turned against him because of their religious fervor. The Shah had no choice but to flee to Egypt. And even to this day, that was in 1979, the Shah's son, to this day, who still considers himself the crown prince of a country that rejects him, he lives in the United States. So the current prime minister at that time, he invited the Grand Ayatollah back after the Shah was left. He invited Khomeini. He said, "You come back here and let's create a Vatican type situation. Just like the Catholics have in Italy. Let's make a small nation state for the leaders of Shia Islam, and that can be here in Iran, and we can all live peacefully together." So Khomeini agreed and came back. And upon his arrival, there was a crowd of actually millions of supporters. And seeing that, I think, really convinced him. But he also had 15 years to plot his revenge. So basically, upon landing back in Iran, he just declared himself as the ruler, supreme ruler, in fact. And so since then, in 1979, after Khomeini, Iran has just been ruled by the Ayatollahs in a complete theocratic dictatorship. So not that that is okay. Obviously, I'm not for Islam. I am not for Muslims. I'm not for dictatorship. I don't even know if I'm really for theocracies. But the events that led up to this are very much to blame of the United States. And the hatred for the United States that allowed Khomeini to take power is our own doing. So they're evil, no doubt. I'm not in support of Iran. This is not an apologetics session for Iran. Their religious radicalism is very dangerous. We need to be very cautious about this, especially if they have nuclear weapons. But we have to remember how they ended up here. It's because of us. We took advantage of this Middle Eastern nation for decades, and controlling them without the people's consent and a true democracy, we pushed them right into the arms of the Muslim terrorists. We know that Muslims are the problem in the Middle East, but our actions gave those Muslims power. Without the United States doing what we did, we could very easily see an Iran that was very similar to UAE today. A bunch of wealthy Middle Eastern people who, yes, they might be Muslims, but we can work with them and create a safe country, a safe world altogether. But that's never going to happen so long as the Ayatollahs are in power, and we gave them that power. So that's all I have time for. Were you offended by this podcast? Good. Thanks for listening, guys. Have a great week, and stay conservative.